Good evening, everyone. We'll begin in just a brief moment, maybe another 2 minutes or so. I ask for your patience. We should begin shortly. Thank you. So it's 6:30 now, time to start. Before we begin, I'd like to apologize for last week. Apparently the video was really bad. I realized that we had a very bad recording last week. So we moved back here at home where the connection is better. We should be okay during this study session. I will make a new video for last week and I'll be posting it sometime within the following week now. Sorry I didn't have a chance to get around to it. I'll be reposting. But this week we should be okay. Hopefully we're okay with the video this week. So I'd like to begin our study session now. So let us begin the study session with the sacred oath. With great fear of God, we acknowledge that the Lord God is our true Father, the one and only God. We revere Meishu Sama as the model for all humanity and as our own example to follow. Meishu Sama, who was born anew as a true child of God, the Messiah, by receiving the divine will that God accomplished in heaven. We believe that Jesus Christ, who 2,000 years ago embodied the name of Messiah, the name most holy and high, is serving the Lord God in unity with Meishu Sama. We regard the messages of Kyoshu Sama, who reveals to us the will of Meishu Sama in this material world, as the sole, absolute, and irreplaceable foundation in advancing our mission here on earth. Words of prayer. God, I acknowledge that you are alive. Within me, you are alive. I thank you for nurturing me to be newly born as your child. May this blessing be shared with all. In the name of Messiah, which is one with Meishu Sama, I surrender myself to you. Please use me as you wish. Thank you. So as always, in every study session that we do, everything that we perceive, everything that we learn, everything that we feel, both positive and negative, let us in the name of Messiah, which is one with Meishu Sama, surrender all back to God, so that we may be born anew as children of God, Messiahs. Okay, so to begin our part 3 of this study session, like I said last week, we had a very bad recording. I'm working on redoing the recording. So we're going to pick up on part 3, but we'll go back to part 2 of last week. I'll be sending that out to everybody within the next week or so. So part 3 of our study of the sacred word of Meishu Sama penetrates all time in space by Masaaki Okada, June 15, 2020. Before we begin, I'd like us to keep the following hymn in mind this week. O God, why do words, your divine creations, exist? They are for you to communicate with us like parent and child. So this hymn of Kyoshi Sama, moved me very much this week, and it actually ties in very well with what we've been studying these past 2 weeks. And I like for us to keep this in mind as we go into the study session. But before going into the reading of the study, I'd like to make a comment on something that we discussed last week. So last week I shared with everyone the example of a few members who called me and were sharing how no matter how hard they surrendered, no matter how much they surrendered, they couldn't help but feel extremely tired of the fact that they were surrendering. Hold on a second, my microphone here went bad. So they couldn't help but feel tired from surrendering, right? Because they surrender and nothing changed, and many times things got worse, and it was just very exhausting. So it got to a point that even they didn't feel like surrendering anymore. And I shared that the way I see it, right? Right now, God is asking us to do this, right? To surrender. And the objective, the main point right now is not to surrender and change the situation, not to surrender and feel better in a certain way, but to surrender and serve in this work to please God, right? Eventually, we will feel that true happiness that Meishu Sama talks about when he declared that he was born anew as a child of God, as a Messiah. But right now, we need to first please God, right? We need to work to serve God and please God in that way. But there's an extra point I'd like to share with that. And that's that when we're surrendering, right, out of our strength, out of our convenience, then we become tired. Then it becomes something very hard to do. And what do I mean by that when I say out of our strength? In reality, everything that we are doing, everything that we are being permitted to do is because we have God's permission. God is allowing us to do that way, to think, right? So even to surrender, without God's permission, humans cannot surrender. Without God's permission, we cannot even breathe, right? And everything that is happening, that's taking shape, is happening with God's permission. Everything that we do. So when we think that we are surrendering, in reality, it is God allowing us to realize that moment that we need to surrender, allowing us or showing us to surrender, right? So that thought of surrendering wells up from within us, but it's coming from God. The origin of that is God. It's not out of my will that I want to surrender. It's God's will, wanting us to surrender. And because God manifests that will, we think, oh, I need to surrender at this moment. And then through that, through the name of Messiah, we surrender it back to God. But what happens is when that thought comes up that we need to surrender, we think it's us, that it's out of our will surrendering. And then we start putting our strength, thinking that it's coming from us. But the origin of that is God. And God is asking us to surrender whatever it is that we are experiencing at that moment. And if we can realize that God is asking us to surrender at that moment, God is calling upon us to do that, then it's no longer a tiresome task, right? Because we are here to serve God. But what happens is, even in surrendering, we tend to use it as our own convenient tool to get rid of a problem, right? To feel better or to improve a situation. But that's not what surrendering is for, right? It's for us to serve God. in that way. It's for us to recognize God at that moment. So actually, I was very moved with this hymn, because even in this hymn we can see that, where Kyo-sama is saying, "Oh God, why do words, your divine creations, exist?" He's questioning God, right? And the realization that Kyo-sama has, they are for you to communicate with us, like parent and child. God created those words to serve him, right? All words. And he created for us to be able, or for God to be able to communicate with us, right? So at that time when we are surrendering, in reality, it's not just that situation. The words in itself that we are being allowed to use, that God created to communicate with us, we need to surrender back to God, is something I've realized, right? The words themselves come from heaven, come from God, and God is saying, here, you notice this? Now surrender it back to me. And we surrender all of ourselves along with those words, along with that whole situation, back to God. And that interaction is the way God is using to communicate. As Kyo-sama has explained in the past, right? It's a mechanism. Our thoughts and feelings have become a mechanism for God to communicate with us. So when we see any situation, in all situations, the ideal is to be able to recognize that God at that moment is allowing us to observe that situation. God at that moment is allowing that thought, that feeling to well up within us, to surrender back to God. And if we can, I think, in that spirit, recognize how blessed we are, how enveloped we are in God's love, and God is allowing us to surrender back to him, then it's no longer a burden. What we are experiencing, we're having the opportunity to serve God, to communicate with God in that oneness. In that oneness with God in heaven, as we return to that heaven and return everything to God through that point. So if we take away our strength from the equation, if we take away our convenience from the equation of trying to change that situation, or in understanding or accepting or not that situation, and recognizing that God at that moment is alive and asking us at that moment through that situation to communicate with him, to return that to him, then I think we can face the situation in a much lighter, unburdened, heavenly state in serving God, right? In that heaven of God. And that same process, I think, happens with each and every human being. So at this moment, through this situation, God might be wanting me to surrender such a feeling, such a situation back to him, recognizing that he's using me to surrender that back to him. God is using us to surrender that back to him. We often say spiritual precedes physical, right? And we think, well, it happens spiritually, and then it takes place physically. And I think that principle, in essence, is the essence of that is God, right? God is spirit. Everything else is a materialization of spirit, right? So if essence, origin, the true essence of everything is God, and everything's coming from spirit and manifesting in us, then we're just a reflection. We have to surrender that back to God. But we tend to shift that and put our point of view, our way of seeing the world, our yardstick of measuring what's good and bad, precedence. And we put that before God and what we want and how we see the world. and how we expect the world to be around us or our lives to be. And with our strength, we're trying to change that, right? And then we end up using this act of surrendering, this wonderful communication tool that God created to communicate with us, trying to manipulate it into our own way of doing things. And that's where we become extremely tired, discouraged, where we become very angry with God, right? From a very limited perception of the world, we are trying to tell God how the world should be. In reality, of maybe just recognizing, wow, God, you're here at this moment. And at this moment, you're alive within me, allowing me to notice this and allowing me to serve you through this situation. Through the name of Messiah, return all these feelings, all these thoughts back to you. So even the thought of becoming tired, all right, we've reached the awareness that it's out of our strength that it's causing us to be tired, discouraged, or even maybe stop surrendering at all, right? Oh, well, this is not working the way I want, so we stop because it's out of our convenience. Even that awareness, through the name of Messiah now, God is allowing us to see that. And with gratitude to God for showing us that He has forgiven, through the name of Messiah, we can return back to God, along with all the words that we're using to return, since the origin of everything is Spirit, is God. So it's just a little bit more into what we said last week. We had a very interesting comment last week after the study session. One member said, even though she does not fully understand what it means to be born anew, how exactly she's serving in this process, she was able to recognize that she wasn't accepting that God was in charge of her life. And through that awareness, she was able to surrender that feeling back to God, right? That she wasn't accepting that God was in charge. And I think that's what happens with all of us all the time, right? To truly accept that God is in charge. When we see a very discouraging situation, and accept that God is alive at that one moment, accept that God is using us, bringing that awareness that we need to surrender that back to God. And then through those words, God is permitting us to surrender it back to Him, right? It's not out of our strength that we're doing it. God is permitting us to do it. Were it not for God's existence there, we wouldn't be able to do that. And through the name of Messiah, to surrender that back to God and come to the awareness of this oneness with God more and more. It's becoming stronger and stronger. And I think it's such a privilege that we're being guided to recognize this and to be able to have this deeper relationship with God. So I'd like to express my gratitude to all those who shared the comments after the study session last week. And I'd like to continue on now, but let's keep this in mind, this hymn in mind. Oh God, why do words, your divine creations, exist? They are for you to communicate with us like parent and child. For God to communicate with us like parent and child. So a quick review from last week, and again, the video in English I'm going to redo. It was really a poor condition, so I'm going to redo and send it out to everybody. But we're going to do a quick review, just some of the points that were covered and we'll be recovering in the video. So one of the points that we looked at was the limitations of our sight, our human sight, and the extent of our conceit, right? So through the article that Masaku-sama shared with us, there was a lot of quotes from Meishu-sama's sacred word. And in that, there's the following quote that Meishu-sama said. If it is something that is seen with human eyes, you should think it cannot be God's plan, His work. You, whose eyes are small and faulty, even though you see my work, you will never understand what it truly is. So I see this as a very severe warning, stern warning from Meishu Sama, showing us humans how limited our sight is. Even though we see God's work, we'll never understand what it truly is. And above that, he says, if it is something that is seen with human eyes, you should think it cannot be God's plan, his work. And when we look at the way up to now that we interpreted Meishu Sama's sacred word, right? The very superficial view of Meishu Sama's sacred word. More and more I've become truly aware how distant, how far, and how much I truly didn't comprehend Meishu Sama's sacred word, that message, right? Even though we thought we were reading in plain language, Meishu Sama made it very clear that it is not something that can be perceived in such a superficial level, right? So that's the main point that we looked at last week. And I gave an example that's not directly related to the sacred word, but even to the plan of God, right? For over 2,000 years, we have known about Jesus. We have known about the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the atonement through Jesus' blood. We have known, I believe, in a very superficial way. And for the first time, maybe, after 2,000 years, the real essence of that is being revealed. And we're starting to know that essence. So God's plan is so profound, so deep, yet I think through human conceit, right, of again putting ourselves before God, we are preceding God. We end up misinterpreting and not realizing anything at all, right? And Masaku Sama elaborated in that part of the article, and he says, doesn't Meishu Sama want us to realize that with our brains, with human knowledge and understanding, we simply cannot understand the sacred word? If we say to Meishu Sama, I do not understand the sacred word whatsoever, I believe he would say to us, it seems you have understood a little. Then Meishu Sama may share with us, even if just a little, his divine wisdom directly revealed to him by God at this moment. Through that point, I could feel the importance of really becoming humble before God, right? We need to humble ourselves before God, recognize our place, and recognize that no matter how much out of human understanding we try to comprehend God, it's what it is. It's human understanding. It's very little, very small. It's like an ant trying to contemplate the universe. It's impossible, right? And when we recognize humbly before God that much, maybe just a little, God will start sharing with us. Meishu Sama will start sharing with us what has been revealed to him by God. Then in the study last week, we also looked at how Meishu Sama says that the true teaching is to reveal what can be explained by what cannot be explained by human logic. And he also says, Meishu Sama's hymn says, "O God, the key, your sacred key that can open up all teachings is already prepared in your glorious kingdom." So Meishu Sama shared with us, this true teaching that exists can not be explained with human logic. The true teaching is to reveal what cannot be explained with human logic. And Meishu Sama shares us what that key is. And through the study session last week, it became even more aware of how precious Kyosho-sama's existence is, and how blessed we are to have Kyosho-sama guiding us. Before Meishu-sama made his transition, he created this position of Kyosho and clearly explained that if it were not, this position exists to direct the divine plan on earth, right? And Kyosho is the master of the teachings. I said Lord of the teachings, but the translation would be the master of the teachings, or the person who's in charge of the teachings, right? The sacred word, Kyosho. And it's Kyosho-sama's mission to reveal to us how to look at the teachings, at the sacred words, how to put them into practice, what direction to walk in. And Meishu-sama made it very clear that he would work freely through Kyosho to do that. And this mystery, as we see here, that Meishu-sama puts, oh God, the key, your sacred key that can open up all teachings, is already prepared in your glorious kingdom, was revealed to us by Kyosho-sama. Back in 2006, actually, Kyosho-sama shows us how to do that, how to access this sacred living teaching. And in that, Masaki-sama says the following: who has until now taught us God's hidden mystery, that the teachings exist in heaven? With great awe and respect, I cannot help but think that Kyosho-sama was able to reach that awareness. Sorry, we're getting feedback from the microphone here. With great awe and respect, I cannot help but think that Kyosho-sama was able to reach that awareness. The same awareness as Meishu-sama. And he was able to reach that awareness not by human power, but by the power of Meishu-sama, who lives within Kyosho-sama. This is not something that can be attained by human strength, human knowledge. Like I shared, I think even if I read Meishu-sama's sacred word 1,000 times, it's not something that I would have ever been able to realize these things, to perceive, and to grow without that divine awareness, that divine knowledge that Meishu-sama so much talks about, right? Within the different types of intelligence. It's the kind of intelligence that's not learned. And you can see in the quote that Kyosho-sama shared with us in 2006 how to reveal that. And I'm going to share with you here. I'm going back a little bit to part 2, just so you're aware, since we didn't have the video last week. Kyosho-sama says, Masaki-sama quoted him, even though you do not understand the meaning of why you need to do so, you must return to heaven and wish to encounter the true and living teachings of Meishu-sama there. Grasp their meaning and experience them, for in heaven exists the true will of Meishu-sama. June 13, 2006. I'll read it one more time for those who are also on the phone. Even though you do not understand the meaning of why you need to do so, you must return to heaven and wish to encounter the true and living teachings of Meishu-sama there. Grasp their meaning and experience them, for in heaven exists the true will of Meishu-sama. It's just unfathomable how Kyosho-sama reached this awareness. Meishu-sama's living teachings are in heaven, and there we must grasp their meaning and experience them. It's not something experienced here physically, but in heaven. For in heaven exists the true will of Meishu Sama. In heaven exists the true will of Meishu Sama. As Meishu Sama said, the key to God's mystery is in heaven, already prepared by God. So it is truly amazing to be at this moment awe-inspiring and so grateful to be able to be serving God, but not any longer locked into my limited human way of perceiving. On the contrary, I'm becoming more and more aware that I know nothing in regards to Meishu Sama's sacred word. But thanks to Kyoshi Sama's existence, we are now we're being guided to understand that true message that permeates all of Meishu Sama's sacred word. And today, in the study session, as we conclude the third part, we'll see Masaaki Sama connects it and puts it together and shows us how Meishu Sama's sacred word, the true essence of that, permeates from the beginning to the end of Meishu Sama's existence here while he was here on earth, right? Physically on earth with us. And I'd like to look a little bit into that with everybody today. So picking up where we left off from last week, on June 5th, 1954, Meishu Sama said, "On my part, I have become much younger. This is called the birth of the Messiah, and the Messiah was born. I am not just saying this. This is a fact. I myself was surprised by it. I must tell you that this is different from rebirth or reincarnation. Rather, it is a new birth, and I was born anew." We've looked at this quote several times, but I think there's so much to it, and I honestly 100% don't truly comprehend the depth of it. But Meishu Sama stresses very much, this is a fact. It's not something created, not something thought up, right? This is called the birth of the Messiah. And the Messiah was born. I am not just saying this is a fact. Meishu Sama made sure to call everybody and say, look, this is a fact. I myself was surprised by it. Meishu Sama himself was surprised by this. Can we imagine Meishu Sama's state of mind? Happiness at the same time? Realizing that this new birth had happened within him? I must tell you that this is different from rebirth or reincarnation. Rather, it is a new birth, and I was born anew. And Masaaki Sama keeps adding here. The sacred word on the birth of the Messiah that starts with those words can be said to be the culmination of his sacred word in their entirety. So this one paragraph is the culmination, the sum total of Meishu Sama's sacred word. Everything is summed up here, right? It's the culmination, the ending point, if you'd say, of all that. It is the culmination of the sacred word of Meishu Sama, and at the same time, it penetrates and permeates all of the sacred word. It can be said that this is the original sacred word. I must emphasize that this original is capital O, right? So I think it's the original from the origin, beginning of everything. This is the original sacred word. It penetrates and permeates all of the sacred word, everything that we've read. penetrates and permeates. It's within and through all of that. And this is really, the next point is really interesting because it's something completely new to me. New awareness, new knowledge I was not aware of. But now I can see how it really connects. This is because it is not something that Meishu Sama suddenly said in his final years. Meishu Sama clearly states on the first day of 1935, the day of the opening ceremony for the foundation of our church. On this first day that our church was born, that the mission of our church is to be born anew. So in 1935, when Meishu Sama opened the church, he stated that the mission was to be born anew. The Meishu Sama says, today, the models of the two great civilizations of the vertical and the horizontal have been more or less completed. And what will become of them is going to be the mission of our church. Now, in the predetermined plan of God, these two great civilizations will be united and become one. This will take place in Japan, and the time is approaching. To be more specific, there will be a husband and a wife. The groom, that is the east, and the bride, that is the west, are going to get married, and the go-between is Kanon. A child will be born, and this child is the true civilization, the ideal world to come that humanity has long been awaiting for, the paradise on earth and the world of Miroku. To accomplish this marriage and have a child be born is the greatest project that humanity has yet to see. And the force to advance this project is the power of Kanon, the construction of the world of great divine light, January 1, 1935. I'm going to read this part one more time. Today, the models of the two great civilizations, of the vertical and the horizontal, have been more or less completed. And what will become of them is going to be the mission of our church. Now, in the predetermined plan of God, these two great civilizations will be united and become one. This will take place in Japan, and the time is approaching. To be more specific, there will be a husband and a wife. The groom, that is the east, and the bride, that is the west, are going to get married, and the go-between is Kanon. A child will be born, and this child is the true civilization, the ideal world to come that humanity has long been awaiting for, the paradise on earth and the world of Miroku. To accomplish this marriage and have a child be born is the greatest project that humanity has yet to see. And the force to advance this project is the power of Kanon, the construction of the world of great divine light, January 1, 1935. This is the greatest project that humanity has yet to see. It's not a human project. Humanity is seeing that. Somebody must be doing this project. This is the greatest project of God. Humanity has yet to see. And Masaki-sama continues. Meishu Sama says that the groom that is the east and the bride that is the west will marry, and a child will be born. That child, he says, is the paradise on earth long awaited by humanity. He says what advances this is the power of Kanon. But Kanon has already become Messiah. So this child is born by the power of Messiah. He says this is the greatest project humanity has yet to see, a program for all humanity that God had predetermined in ancient times. How wonderful this sacred word is. How deep and profound is the will of God conveyed through Meishu Sama. The seed of the original sacred word, the birth of the Messiah, the culmination of the divine work of Meishu Sama, was already entrusted to us by Meishu Sama on that first day, at the dawn of the founding of our church. Keeping in his heart the sacred word he spoke at the founding of the church, didn't Meishu Sama advance divine work, accomplish this great project with his own body a year before he passed away and announced the original sacred word? January 1, 1935, when Meishu Sama began his divine work, and June 5, 1954, when Meishu Sama made his announcement on the birth of the Messiah, the culmination of his divine work. These two are directly connected by one straight line. Isn't it amazing, this connection? When I first heard Kyosho Sama saying that this message of Meishu Sama, this birth of Messiah, permeated all the sacred words, to be honest, I couldn't truly comprehend it. I believe it, but I didn't see it, right? But now, even more directly connected, right? Through Meishu Sama's actual prototype. Masaki Sama has put that together so easily to perceive, right? In the beginning of the opening of the church, Meishu Sama was already showing us what was going to happen. But when that happened, Meishu Sama himself said he was surprised. I think he was surprised by the actual form in which it happened. And it's just amazing to be able to see that connection today, to see the dots being connected. And Masaki Sama continues. That is to say, in Meishu Sama's hymns, calligraphies, writings, and sermons, doesn't the will of to be born anew penetrate every one of them? Each and every one of his hymns, each and every one of his calligraphies, each and every letter in his writings, each and every phrase of his sermons are filled with and penetrated by one thing. It is God's divine plan to make us be born anew by the power of Messiah. It is the will of God, and it is the will of Meishu Sama. All of Meishu Sama's writings, all of Meishu Sama's sermons, calligraphies, all that Meishu Sama did, even his body, physical body and soul, were to show us God's divine plan, to make us be born anew by the power of the Messiah. How fortunate are we today to be able to start seeing this truth. It's like a veil has been opened. But that only was possible because of Kyosho Sama revealing that to us. I think that no matter how hard we try with our human consciousness and intellect, to connect these dots would have been impossible as they're being connected now. It's like this big puzzle, right? Or having a guide showing us how the pieces fit together. Still more, Masaksama says, Meishu-sama does not say that this matter is only about himself. He clearly says that the mission of our church is to serve in the work of bearing a child by the power of Messiah. He clearly says that that is our mission. Kyosho-sama has been saying that each and every one of us, too, following Meishu-sama's example, must be born anew as a child of God, as a Messiah. But this is in no way a matter that Kyosho-sama spoke of all of a sudden. This is a matter that Meishu-sama has been revealing to us, a matter with which he has entrusted us since the first day of the founding of the church. And there's one more thing, a very important thing that I must say. That is, this matter, to be born anew. If you stretch back 2,000 years before Meishu-sama, a holy man from Nazareth, Jesus Christ, left these words. In the Bible, it says, "Now there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. This man came to Jesus by night and said to him, 'Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God. For no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him.' Jesus answered him, 'Truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born anew, he cannot see the kingdom of God.' Nicodemus said to him, 'How can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born?' And Jesus answered, 'Truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Do not marvel that I said to you, you must be born anew. The wind blows where it wills, and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know whence it comes or whither it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit.'" John 3, 1 through 8. And Jesus continues, "Truly, truly, I say to you, we speak of what we know and bear witness to what we have seen, but you do not receive our testimony. If I have told you earthly things and you do not believe, how can you believe if I tell you heavenly things? No one has ascended into heaven but he who descended from heaven, the Son of Man. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life." John 3, 11 through 15. I cannot help but feel an inexplicable oneness in these words of Jesus and the sacred word of Meishu-sama. I cannot help but say that there is something unfathomable when I think about the glory of God prepared in heaven, spoken by Jesus and Meishu-sama. To be born anew as a child of God by the power of Messiah is the key to open up all the teachings that were prepared in heaven, in the kingdom of God. This true will of God penetrates 2,000 years of time and space, penetrates Meishu Sama and Jesus, and penetrates ourselves. The entire world, no, the entire universe is brimming with it. Oh, how my heart is filled with awe. Just one moment. It's really amazing. In the words of Jesus 2,000 years ago, we can see them resonate in the words of Meishu Sama 2,000 years later. The same message. One point that caught my attention in that quote, even though there's a lot of points, one I like to share. Jesus talks about being born of water and spirit. And when I first read this, it was really something that came up in my mind. Being born of water and spirit. And there's a lot of connections that Meishu Sama talks about, right? Spirit is vertical, water is horizontal, spirit is God, water would be human, right? But the merging of the east and the west, fire in water, spirit in water brings a new birth. And 2,000 years ago, Jesus is talking about this birth of spirit from spirit in water, right? This joining. And Meishu Sama talks about this marriage in the East and the West, these two civilizations coming together and a new birth taking place. So you can truly see that it's not for nothing that Meishu Sama has the symbol of our church as a cross, as the joining of East and West. But you can, as Kyosho Sama has clarified to us, all of God's plan, design is imbued into that symbol, right? Into that design. And everything is there. And our way home, back to the center, back to God, to be born anew as a new child of God is also there. So when I read that, I could see that merging and that connection also. And that really, really moved me as one of the parts in that quotation. I'll keep reading. At this time, it has been decided to call the teachings of Meishu Sama Sacred Word of Meishu Sama. But when we read the sacred word, when we read Kyosho Sama's messages, when we read the Bible, shouldn't we first, in regard to the content, obediently acknowledge that they cannot be understood with human intelligence? And since the key to understanding the teachings exists in the kingdom of heaven, shouldn't we go to that heaven and come in contact with those words, having the thought that to be born anew by the power of Messiah penetrates everything? I'm going to read this one more time. At this time, it has been decided to call the teachings of Meishu Sama Sacred Word of Meishu Sama. But when we read the sacred word, when we read Kyosho Sama's messages, or when we read the Bible, shouldn't we first, in regard to the content, obediently acknowledge that they cannot be understood with human intelligence? And since the key to understanding the teachings exists in the kingdom of heaven, shouldn't we go to that heaven and come in contact with those words, having the thought that to be born anew by the power of Messiah penetrates everything? It's beyond just a book. It's beyond just some words. It's beyond some moral teaching. The content comes from heaven itself, lives in heaven itself. So we need to go to that heaven to come into contact with those words. Having the thought to be born anew by the power of Messiah penetrates everything. Meishu Sama says that a newly born child is, in other words, paradise on earth. This Meishu Sama was born anew as the Messiah in 1954. It is this very Meishu Sama that is the prototype of paradise on earth that we must treasure to the utmost and that we must honor and hold in reverence. I have no doubt that the construction of paradise on earth means the expansion of the divine work throughout all humanity of being born anew by the power of Messiah, following the example of Meishu Sama. It is this very Meishu Sama that is the prototype of paradise on earth that we must treasure to the utmost and that we must honor and hold in reverence. This new birth itself is the paradise on earth. I have no doubt that the construction of paradise on earth means the expansion of the divine work throughout all humanity, of being born anew by the power of the Messiah, following the example of Meishu Sama. That paradise is not just Meishu Sama who accomplished and then it's completed. Each and every one of us must follow this example of Meishu Sama. Throughout all humanity, being born anew by the power of the Messiah. And it is this God-determined, greatest project humanity has yet to see of bearing a child by the power of Messiah. In this divine work of salvation that has been made clear to us for the first time by Kyosho Sama, that Meishu Sama truly entrusted to us and that far exceeds our human intellect. Let us serve with indescribable joy. Just this last paragraph one more time. In this God-determined, not human-determined, God-determined, greatest project humanity has yet to see of bearing a child by the power of Messiah. We have yet to experience this. Is the divine work of salvation that has been made clear to us for the first time by Kyosho Sama. Truly, I must say, I would have never gone that deep with Meishu Sama's sacred word. How limited was my human intellect looking at Meishu Sama's sacred word. But it has been made clear to us for the first time by Kyosho Sama. The pieces of the puzzle are starting to fit. That Meishu Sama truly entrusted to us and that far exceeds our human intellect. Let us serve with indescribable joy. That's the process God is doing. God is allowing us to think, to perceive, to come to realizations. But let's return that to God with that indescribable joy of being able to serve God at this very moment. It's so exciting for me. I know it's very hard at times, but that's just God allowing us to see our old selves and recognize Him, and through the name of Messiah, return everything to him. So our study session went a little bit longer than expected, maybe 5 minutes for any comments, if anybody has any right now. And we can pick up next week. If anybody has extra comments that might take a little bit longer, we can pick up next week before the study begins. So I'd like to leave the floor open for anybody. That's a good question. Let me read it out to everybody. One moment, please. In Saving America, Meisho Sama provides readers with numerous testimonials of faith in hopes of showing Americans that our church works, for a lack of better phrasing. Many of the testimonials are either written by or about young people, showing Meisho Sama's interest in the youth's role in society. In the face of judgment, how do we ingrain Meisho Sama's message of salvation in the American youth, who are surrounded by a culture of evidence-based values? How do we show them that we work? Okay. I think personally, to show anybody anything is pretty much impossible. To get anybody to understand from an intellectual point of view, since it is so limited. I think first and foremost, the way I see it, we have to be vibrating that message, right? We have to be vibrating that truth. And when I mean vibrating, I mean by living that truth. And I think that the more and more we recognize that God is alive within us, God is allowing us to think, to feel, and to see everything so that we can serve Him and surrendering everything back to God. The more and more that we surrender all that we are observing back to God in service to God, right? People are going to be naturally looking at us for guidance, for direction, to see in which way to go. That is the biggest evidence, the biggest example we can give is of ourselves. And when we return to heaven within us, right? And we do what Meisho Sama says, first we return to heaven, and then we bring everybody into that heaven, right? But through the name of Messiah, we return with everybody to that heaven. Their souls are going to feel that truth, right? The true work, I believe, it's not something physical. It's what we're seeing now. It's this new birth, true paradise on earth. And as we are living that, and the more our soning is vibrating that, the more that in our soning we're returning that to God, serving God through that, the more God will use us to bring this message out to the youth and to everybody else who needs this truth, right? Because the whole world is headed in a direction to be born anew as a child of God, as a Messiah. This is something that, as we see today, permeates all eternity. It's not something that Meisho Sama just came up with at the end of his last year before he passed away, right? And if the whole world is going in that direction, this is the truth to follow, right? Following Meisho Sama's example. And I think that Meisho Sama is a perfect example of that. Meisho Sama did that. And because Meisho Sama did that, he attracted people in that direction. But for the first time, we're starting to understand what Meisho Sama was actually doing, right? Meisho Sama is finally showing us, revealing to us what that really is. So I think we have to be that example. We have to be that work, right? We are the church. When Meisho Sama talks about church, right, and we think of a physical building, but each one of us is that church. And that church is what needs to show everybody. So the doors in our church, within our soul, has to open for all humanity. So as we are practicing this, we're living this, we are putting this into service to God, right? Surrendering everything to God through the name of Messiah. Recognize that God is allowing us to feel, allowing us to experience. It's not us that's doing, it's God. And we're just here to serve Him through that process. Then I think it will open up a way for all humanity. And that's what maybe someone's probably expecting from us right now. That's my personal view on that. I think there's another question. One moment, please. Which one? Where can I find this sacred word of Meishu Sama? I have to see which sacred word you're referring to. So the ones that were quoted here, they exist. They're there. I can't tell you exactly what book it's in, but it is the sacred word of Meishu Sama. All of Meishu Sama's articles, calligraphies, they're all Meishu Sama's sacred word. So I'm not sure exactly which specific one you're referring to right now. If you want to send in a text, maybe we can go a little bit searching for, if I don't know off the top of my head. But a lot of this material was printed. It's being retranslated. Some of the things are being newly translated that was never translated. So I'm not sure exactly which one you're referring to, but if you can leave that in the message, we can look into that for you. Okay, but I like to express my gratitude to everybody. If that's all the comments and questions we have for today. If you have any more, please feel free to send them. We can go deeper and study and see ever more how to serve God through that. So I'd like to express my gratitude, and stay tuned for the remake of the video from last week. We'll be sending that shortly, within the week or so, to everybody. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie.